Everyone in the private sector has the right to feel secure in their home, settled in their community, and able to plan for the future with confidence. But millions of responsible tenants could still be uprooted by their landlord with little notice and often little justification. This is wrong, and today we're acting by preventing these unfair evictions. Landlords will still be able to end tenancies when they have legitimate reasons to do so, but they will no longer be able to unexpectedly evict families with only 8 weeks' notice. Pop quiz, who said that and when? That was Theresa May over 6 years ago when she first announced the Renters Reform Bill. And now we're on the cusp of the Renters' Rights Bill. And folks, it is actually happening. This is going to be the biggest change to the private rented sector in over 30 years. Thank you for joining us today, especially those of you who found the right venue and didn't go to the Blanket Hall. But we needed to move to a slightly bigger venue for those of you who've joined us in the past. I'm delighted that you could join us today to learn about the changes and those things that are going to affect you as landlords and potential landlords as we go into the back end of this year. And to give you some idea about how this has evolved, I literally received a message at 19 minutes past 5 today from somebody who was chatting with Lord Best this afternoon after the sitting in the House of Lords with the very latest update. So I'm pleased to say that what we tell you today is as up to date as we can possibly be. But as you're here towards the end, we're not quite there yet, but all will be revealed. In terms of the format of today, it is similar to what we've done to previous events. Those of you who've joined us in the past, we will present to you for around 45-50 minutes, but in a slight departure from normal, we will invite questions. We'll have an open Q&A for anybody who's got a general question about what we're talking about today and what we're covering. And then afterwards, we hope you'll be able to join us for a drink in the cafe at the back, glass of wine. And if you want to talk to any of us about anything we've spoken about today, if you've got any specific questions or you don't want to ask them in public, please do come and have a chat with any of the team and we'll be delighted to talk to you. Obviously, there's the Parker's team and we've got the CEO of HomeLet, Andy's here, Andy Halstead. He will be talking about referencing and rent and legal protection. We've got our semi-tame mortgage broker from Vanmark, and Chris will be able to answer any questions you've got afterwards if you want to know what's going on with the mortgage market at the moment. And the team from Parker Bullen solicitors are here as well, and they'll be able to talk to you if you've got any questions on what's going on with conveyancing or the wider law. Then again, they'll be around afterwards to have a chat with you, but we'll come back to that later. So without further ado, what I was going to talk about first of all is a quick update on the market. And this is a little bit stats heavy, but hopefully I've picked the most interesting ones that will fire off a little bit of a thought process for those of you who are thinking about the value of your assets. The average property price in West Oxfordshire now is £390,929. That is up 1.6% year on year, or in other terms, slightly less than inflation. What is really noticeable is that transaction volumes locally are down 21% year on year. And to put that in context, across the wider southeast has only seen a 10% drop. What has also changed in the last year? The average time to achieve a sale sold subject to contract, so to agree that price, is 35 days. That's up 25% year on year here in West Oxfordshire. And over the last 5 years, West Oxfordshire has built on average 708 new homes, but most of those were front-loaded. And in the last couple of years, it's been rather lower than that. Of all the properties that are currently on the market in West Oxfordshire, 41% fit into that bracket of between £250,000 and £500,000. But what's really interesting is of those that are sold subject to contract, nearly 60% are in that bracket, which tells me what I already know as an agent, and that the more expensive homes have been more difficult to sell over the last few months. Switching to the lettings market, what's going on there? 17.7% of residents in West Oxfordshire are tenants. And the average rent is now £1,368 per calendar month. That's a 5% rise year on year. Diving into a little bit more detail, the average two-bedroom house is achieving £1,325. That's up 7.7% year on year. Whereas a four-bedroom house is achieving on average £1,819 per calendar month. That's a drop of 2.9%. And again, that tells me what I already know as an agent. Tenants are finding the cost of living crisis and the increase in rents difficult, and they're downsizing to make their budget fit. We also have older tenants in West Oxfordshire. The average age is 38, and over 38% of tenants are in excess of 45 years old. That is much older than the average in the South East. And in terms of the housing mix here in West Oxfordshire, we don't have many flats. 10.7% of all properties are flats, but 32% of lets are flats. So if you're looking at a block of flats, the majority of those are going to be rented. That is where the tenancies are focused. And of course, only a few weeks ago, the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced the Oxford-Cambridge Technology Belt and the investment and the development that's going to be happening around that. And when Josh talks later about what's happening in the sales market, that's a national picture. Just think about the local context. Think about migration into the area, dealing with all this infrastructure build and all this investment. There are going to be more tenants, there's going to be more demand on housing, and we're not building enough new homes. So put that into the context of the Oxford-Cambridge Technology Belt. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, probably without singing and dancing, but nevertheless will entertain you with legislation and compliance, Joy and Katie.
The government has got a drive to improve the standard of housing within the private rental sector. So they have made it very clear that by 2028, the minimum standard from EPC needs to be C. That was for all new tenancies. 2030 for all existing tenancies. That actually isn't very long away, a couple of years. So what we need to talk about today is what you need to do as landlords to make sure that you're ready for this change. If you don't know what your EPC rating is, when you get home today, have a look. And have a look at what it is alphabetically, but also what it is numerically. Because you've got some quite big banding within those alphabetical banding. So if you are a D, for example, you might be a couple of points off a C. Equally, you might be a couple of points off an E. Now, the way EPCs are calculated has changed over the last few years. So if your EPC was done 5 years ago and it was a C, but only just a C, it might actually be a D when it comes to being redone. So our advice for you today is to go home and check your EPC. If it's got a few years to run, get it redone now. Have a look at the EPC and then have a chat with the EPC provider. They can give you some tips on how to get it up to the next rating, because it's going to be valid for 10 years and you won't need to get it redone when the law changes. Don't get trapped by doing something which is eco-friendly, because it might not necessarily give you the point. So, for example, if you needed to put in a new boiler, a biomass boiler will give you an extra 12 points. Just a normal condensing boiler will give you 23 points. You might spend a lot of money on a biomass boiler, it's not going to help you. Double glazing is going to cost you 10 grand for a house, give you 3.5 points on average. A few low-level energy lighting bulbs, 1.1. So you're going to have a lot of expenditure for a very few points on that. Consultation is just finished for EPCs, I think it's last week. What we're hoping is that they'll listen to what landlords have been saying and that they're going to bring in a more staggered approach. Fingers crossed they will take that on board. But what the government is doing is introducing grants. So there is a warm homes grant that landlords can apply for. There are 3 criteria that you have to meet. I think you need to get 2 of those 3. You get £30,000 as a grant for one rental property and then 15 for any subsequent rental properties. So it certainly is worth having a look at that. We're working with local EPC providers who can help you get your EPCs done, give you some advice and just help you get you into that position to transition you whilst all these other changes are happening. Over to the big headline news. Katie and I are going to talk through what we've had as numerous questions over the last months with regard to the Renters' Rights Bill. It's a really broad area, there's lots of changes. These are our key questions that we get asked almost daily. We're going to tell you what's going on and give you our advice on how best to prepare for these changes. Katie's going to start off with Biggie, the most asked question of all questions.
Yeah, I am a pet lover. So pets, that's going to change in that you will not be able to unreasonably withhold consent for your tenants to have pets. Now, this isn't anything to worry about. There is going to be an amendment to the tenant fee ban. Andy will talk about pet insurance later on, but that amendment will mean that you will be able to take out a pet insurance policy and you will be able to charge your tenant for that. Our advice on that bit is that the landlord takes out the policy and the landlord charges the tenant so that the landlord is in control. If you leave it to a tenant, we all know what's going to happen. Tenant moves in, shows you proof on month 1, and on month 2, they cancel the expensive policy and you're no longer covered. You will have a specific time frame that you will be able to go back to your tenant and give the consent or not. It's going to look something like 14 days, 28 days. And there will be certain situations where you will be able to withhold that permission. So I was talking to a landlord last week that's got a cottage with all the other cottages alongside, but the right-of-way runs along the back of all of those cottages and those gardens are completely open. Now, in that situation, we're not going to be able to give consent to a tenant to have a dog because you've got strangers coming in and out down that right-of-way, and it simply won't be safe for everybody around. So there will be situations that you can withhold that. And of course, if your superior lease, so if you've got a flat and the superior lease says that you can't have pets, you can't supersede that. So the permission would be withheld in that situation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. The day that the Renters' Rights Bill becomes law, that will have an immediate effect on all tenancies straight away. There's going to be no staggered approach. There'll be no period of 6 months transition for tenancies which are already signed as fixed-term tenancies. But what will happen overnight is that all tenancies will become periodic. That means that your tenant can give 2 months' notice in line with the rent due date at any point, even if they've just signed up for a 12-month fixed-term tenancy. Now, because it's in line with the rent due date, you're probably looking at a minimum term ever of 3 months because they won't give notice probably on the day they move in. So you're looking at 3 months minimum tenancy term. I know that sounds scary, but actually, realistically, it's nothing that we are worried about as agents. People don't like moving house. It's stressful, it's expensive, and unless life happens, you have a baby, you get divorced, you need to move for a job, you're not going to be moving house. Scotland's had this law in place for a number of years. They haven't seen a significant rise in a churn of tenancies. So please don't be worried about that. All we would say, and our advice to you as landlords, is make the right decision at the start of the tenancy. You're putting in the right tenant for you. Have that conversation when you're qualifying them. Have a chat about what their terms are. Are they moving for work and only going to be here a few months? Or are they here for the long haul? Because actually you might find that your plans and their plans are actually aligned. You might be thinking of selling in a year. Great, because that works well, especially with what we're going to talk about in a little bit. So don't panic. Just make sure your tenants are well looked after. They're happy in their homes. They've got a great standard of quality accommodation. You'll be fine.
Thank you, Joy. Another big one is the abolishment of the Section 21s. So as it stands today, if you no longer wanted your tenant in the property, you would serve them with a Section 21, and you have to give no reason as to why you're doing that. They're going to abolish that, but there will still be 4 main reasons that a landlord can gain possession of a property, and they do tend to be the main reasons that we serve a Section 21 at the moment. So those are, if you are a landlord and you're looking to sell, you would serve a Section 21 under Ground 1A for sales. You will be able to serve that notice if your tenant fell into arrears, and Joy's going to go into a bit more detail about arrears because that is changing significantly. You will also be able to sell if you or a family member wishes to move back into the property, and then there'll be antisocial behaviour linked with the council if you do go through that situation. So they're the 4 main reasons you'll be able to sell. There are changes in when you serve a Section 8 under Ground 1A, which means you wish to sell the property, that tenant has to have had a minimum of 12 months in that property. So dependent on when you put your tenant in will depend on when you can or can't serve notice. So if we had a tenant move in today, we wouldn't be able to serve that 4 months notice until month 8 because they must have 12 months of that tenancy. However, if you've had a tenant in there for 5 years and today you wish to start selling the property, you could serve 4 months' notice from today. There are also going to be really tight rules around if you use that notice and say you want to sell your property, you must sell the property. There is no, that's what I'm going to say, and tomorrow I'm going to change my mind. You must sell the property and you will not be able to remarket that property for 12 months. So you have to be really sure that you want to sell it. What will happen here is your relationship with your tenant is going to be key. If you've got a brilliant relationship with that tenant and they know your plans, they know you wish to sell, you may well start marketing the property without serving them notice. Then you're not going to fall foul of the remarketing law that's coming in. And if you don't sell, the tenant stays in. But the fines for going against those rulings start at £7,000. So it is going to be a really hard and fast. They're the rules, and that's how you've got to abide by them.
I think Josh is going to have a... No, who's going to have a chat later? Selling. Josh will cover that for... Yeah. Okay. So of all the rules and for getting property back, the reasons that you can serve notice, we're actually, as agents, not particularly concerned about any of them, except for rent arrears. The law surrounding getting possession for rent arrears is the most significant one, and I'll just run into that in a bit more detail. So at the moment, if your tenant is 2 months in arrears, you need to give them 2 months' notice that you're going to go to court to get possession of the property. That is going to change. It will change that your tenant now needs to be 3 months in arrears, and you will need to give 4 weeks notice. That is a significant change and puts landlords really on the back step, because there's going to be such a backlog in the courts. The courts will be dealing with all possession requests. By the time you actually get in front of the judge to get possession, you could be talking at least 6, 8, 12 months down the line. There are ways around to protect that. We're going to have a chat about rent and legal protection. A couple of things to do, though, before that. Now you can do something. If you haven't spoken to your tenant, if, say, your tenant's in arrears at the moment, they keep paying back again, going back into arrears, are they the right tenant for you? You need to have a chat with that tenant. You need to think carefully. Are they the right tenant for you? Do you need to give notice? If you need to take out rent and legal protection, you can actually do that now as well. If your tenant is not in arrears, you can take out rent and legal protection now, because if they've got a history of doing it, they might do it again. So make sure that you're protecting yourself now whilst you can. Keep that tenant with rent and legal protection if you think they've mended their ways, or really think about whether they're the right tenant for you.
Yeah, brilliant. And year on year with rent and legal protection, we've actually seen a 50% increase of landlords that are taking it. And the most important thing, and Brendan will kill me if I don't say it, it is a tax deductible expense. It costs £36 a month, including your VAT, less than a coffee a day. It really doesn't make sense not to have it in place. The next one is rent arrears. So at the moment, when you rent increases, at the moment, as we have standard ASTs, every year we would provide the tenant with a new tenancy agreement, and that's the means that we would increase their rent. So landlords are saying, well, if we don't have ASTs, how will we be increasing their rent? And the answer still is annually. There'll be a different form that we fill out. And that rent will be increased annually. But the most important part is that on the day that we increase it and we put that forward to the tenant, we are going to need to evidence that the rent we're putting forward is in fact market value rent. And that's where your agent's going to provide right move reports and all sorts of other things to show that, yes, we're increasing this 2-bedroom house to £1,200 rent, and that is market value rent, and here is the proof. It's all over the news, and tenants have got so much more knowledge than they've ever had before, and they will be aware that if they don't agree to that rent and they think it's unfair, they will be able to use a first-tier tribunal. where their case will be heard and it will be decided whether that is a fair rent or not. Now, there's going to be a huge amount of tenants that use that moving forward that haven't used it before. And as you know, with the rent arrears and everything else in the court, there will be a delay in that being heard. And you aren't able to collect or take that increase in rent until the case has been heard in the first tier tribunal. So that will delay things on that side. The other big change is that you are not allowed to collect rent in advance. So some landlords will now have a tenant that's come from abroad and will say, I'll pay you 12 months rent in advance. And we'll take that and we'll go with it. And that's absolutely fine. If you've done that today, you will be able to keep that 12 months rent until it runs out. What you won't be able to do is then ask for the next 12 months rent in advance. So there'll be different ways and different means of referencing, and you will really need to make sure that your tenant is financially stable when you put them into that property and you're happy with them paying that rent monthly. The other way that rent in advance not being allowed to be taken changes things is because if I was moving into a property tomorrow and I rented it from Joy, and Joy hadn't executed my tenancy agreement, and I paid her a month's rent today, that is classed as rent in advance because I haven't entered into the contract with Joy. So when you're looking at moving tenants in, you'll need to be really careful on the timing and ensure that your tenancy agreement has already been executed and therefore you've entered into a contract and you can take the rent. If you haven't, that rent will be classed as rent in advance, which will not be allowed to be taken. And then this also changes things with the way that you take a holding deposit. So when a tenant enters into agreeing to take property today, they pay 1 week's rent to secure the property, and that is called a holding deposit. That holding deposit goes, when they enter the contract, from being a holding deposit, it goes into the first month's rent. Now, technically, that will be classed as rent in advance. So agents are going to need to change the way that they do things, and we'll still be able to take that 1 week holding deposit, but we will need to ensure that it is moved into the 5 week security deposit. So it wasn't ever rent, and it wasn't rent in advance, and we're all law abiding. But the key thing here is your records. You are going to need to be able to prove that, yes, I took 1 week at the beginning to secure the deposit, but it wasn't rent in advance and it moved straight into the security deposit. And that's going to catch quite a few people out.
Particularly because you've only got 28 days to lodge your deposit.
Lodge your deposit, yeah.
With the custodial scheme, whatever it is. So, yeah, could be really, really key.
Yeah.
That actually brings us on to what we're telling you to do as takeaways from today is prepare for these changes. We've got a bit of time to do it. We think end of the year, so you really are in a good position to make sure you're in the very best place to do so. But make a record of absolutely everything you do. Mitigate your risk, protect yourselves for all eventualities. And that really means take out rent and legal protection. That will cover you for nearly everything that we've talked about today that is a risk. Put the right tenants in right at the start. Make sure you do all the checks. Know the law. Understand the law. It is changing daily. It is very, very complex. We're constantly doing training and it's blowing our minds. So if you're self-educating as a landlord, it's a lot to take on.
Yeah. And onto that brings me nicely onto my next slide. So with all of this in mind, we've brought in a new service at Parker's, which is called Rent Receipt Plus. And basically, this service is here to fill the gap for self-managing landlords that don't quite want to pay for fully managed because they can do all the maintenance themselves. They know a handyman, they know a builder, they know Bob the plumber, they do their own visits, and they're really quite happy with the tenant, so they're happy managing it. But what they're not happy about is going to prison. So this service covers all of the compliance. And I could talk about compliance all day long, but it's your EICRs, your gas safeties, your EPCs, your right to rent, your smoke alarm, carbon alarm. It goes on and on and on. And this service means that parkers take complete liability and ensure that you are compliant 365 days a year. So all you have to worry about is carrying on that nice relationship with your tenant, collecting the rent and doing the management. We also have access to the out-of-hours maintenance triage service for those tenants. So those of you landlords that like to go on weekends away and holidays, and that tenant, pesky tenant, phones up every Friday night to tell you that they've just got back from the pub and it's 10 o'clock at night and their kitchen tap is dripping and they're really annoyed about it. We will give you access to our out-of-hours maintenance team that will tell that tenant, stop being ridiculous at 10 o'clock at night, and we will report it to your landlord, who will deal with it in working hours. But importantly, if there is something genuinely serious going on in that property and there's a leak down into the flat below, they will do a one-way video call and ensure that the tenant knows how to deal with it, how to turn the water off, and you will then be notified so that you can deal with the maintenance of that. So if you've got any questions on that service or any of our other services, we've got plenty of brochures out the front, and Joy and I will be enjoying a glass of wine afterwards, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Very much.
Thank you.
Who would be a landlord?
Amen.
Who's selling? I'm an investor in property, and I'm going to remain an investor in property. And what I want to speak about for the next, I've been given 9 minutes and 60 seconds. If I overrun, I'm in a lot of trouble. I just want to put your mind at rest that, I mean, half of what we hear, half of what we read, this new legislation, it's bonkers, it's anti-landlord, it makes no sense, but it is what it is, and it ain't going to change. So we either get out of the market and invest in something else, or we make sure we're in a great place where we mitigate all of that risk and protect ourselves. And that's what we do on behalf of Brendan and his business. So first of all, let me talk about how we try and manage risk right up front. And that is by professionally referencing the applicants that want to live in properties that you own. And we do approximately 1 million references every year. So I love how all of the government speak and the political speak is about landlords and landlord data. We've got the tenant data, and believe me, you're better than the tenant data. We know how tenants behave because for 30 years now, we've been referencing literally millions of tenants and guaranteeing millions of rents. So we know how tenants behave. Our job is to assess them and make sure that we do the best job possible up front. And I'm going to show you what we do. But the fact is, a reference is only good for the day that you're in. Life can change within hours of being referenced. People can get fired, people can lose their jobs, people can get sick, people can get divorced, all kinds of things. However, our job is to do the best possible job at that moment in time. Don't worry about, even though the screen's big, that's very hard to read. It's just giving you an example of all of the data that we look at before we produce a final report that recommends which way Brendan and his business should take the applicant. There's only really 3 outcomes: that we consider the applicant acceptable, we consider them unacceptable, or they're acceptable with the support of an appropriate guarantor. And that's the work that we do throughout. Now, we access the same data that a credit card company, a bank, or a mortgage lending business would access. So we look directly into the creditworthiness of each applicant. We even track the headroom on credit, because the next pending financial crisis in this country is people's going to run out of credit. People buy pizzas on Klarna. They pay for pizzas in over 3 months. So this thing is all sort of adding up. And when we look at all that analysis, some people's salaries now are only meeting the monthly payments of the things that they've purchased in the past. So we're very, very careful about all of that. Also, I've got to tell you, I don't want to add fear to it because I'm going to take it all away in a minute, but fraudsters are on the increase, and they're brilliant. Just watch this. So what's going to happen in front of your eyes now, if this is you or I, through Google, not under no dark art, this is not the black web, and we're going to create a bank statement. And I will put money on it that anyone in this room, with what's being created on the screen, will believe it's real. You'd have no idea that what we're seeing created on the screen now is a fake bank statement. And it's free. You don't even have to pay for it. You go onto the website, here we go, bank statements, whatever, and we're going to create one. You can do exactly the same with a utilities bill. You do exactly the same with telephone bill. You do the same with the driving license. You do it with any document you want. And it's completely free of charge, and you don't even have to do it in some kind of undercover way. It's not as if you have to go to a back room somewhere and pay someone some cash. Just do it online. Do it this evening at home if you choose to do it. And it's as quick as this video has been watched. So how long did that take? It's still on. But we're talking 2 minutes maybe. And when this is finished, I'll show you the final document. So that bank statement that you can create at home would look perfect. But when it goes through our platform, it looks like that. So we've got all of the AI intelligence that we run through our platform, that identifies subtle changes in pixelation. It'll identify subtle changes in the way that the typing has been carried out, or whatever it might be. And it's impossible for these kinds of documents to get through our platform. So I really just want to give you a bit of confidence that all the work that we do for Brendan's business is as good as it gets in terms of trying our best to qualify applicants for your properties. But even with all of that, it goes wrong. It can go wrong. And when it goes wrong, which is not very often, it's very ugly. It's horrible. And in the new world, post this new legislation, it's going to be even worse. It's going to be far more expensive and far more difficult to get possession. You're not in too bad a shape here. So this is what happens in your local area if it goes wrong. It's taking 2 months plus to obtain a possession order, but that's going to be significantly extended. When we cut through the detail of all of this, because I haven't really got time to go through it, you won't get possession of a house back within a year if the tenant chooses not to move out, and they won't have to pay you 1 penny of rent, and there's nothing you can do about it. When you get to the point where you've been awarded the property back, trying to get a bailiff is like hen's teeth. You're not going to get a bailiff in quick order. I don't know whether you know this, but now if there's a dog in the property, the bailiff requires a dog handler to go. They're £600, and you can't get one anyway. So getting possession is going to be quite difficult. And with the average rents around here, it's easily £12,000 to £15,000 each time a property goes wrong. So that's sort of the inherent risk around us as property investors and what happens with a tenant with a small degree of savvy who decides, I don't want to pay your rent, or I can't pay your rent, and I'm not moving out. And that is where we step in. So basically, we take all of that risk away. If you have the rent protection that is being offered, then when the tenant doesn't pay, we step in and we pay 100% of the rent from the day of rent arrears without any excesses until the point when you get vacant possession. So if that takes goodness knows how many months, each month through that process, you get all of your rent. We also cover all of the legal costs and all of the legal services, and none of that leaves our office, so it's all done within our business. We cover you and your legal costs for getting possession, even if the tenant continues to pay the rent, but won't move out on the grounds that you're allowed to get your possession back. We cover rent increases if the tenant refuses to pay the rent increase until the tribunal awards it. So if you serve your section 13, the tenant says, I'm not paying this, you take them to the tribunal. If that takes 12 months, we pay that rent increase until the tribunal hears it. Of course, then you'll get awarded that rent increase and we'll get our money back. So these are all the protections that are built in to the proposition that we provide to Brendan and his team. There's lots of reasons why a tenancy can go wrong over and above not paying the rent. I just want to make the point that they are protected. So there is a lot of bad news for us as property investors, but it is not that difficult to protect it and to mitigate these extra risks that we face. And from a cost point of view, if you round it up, it's close to free. It's £1.18 a day, and off that £1.18 per day, you get is tax deductible from your expenses in any event. So for any property investor who doesn't take advantage of this, we've got a very good list of doctors that you can ring, and they'll give you some mental health advice. Because you've got to be barking. In this new world, not having this is the same as being bonkers. Thank you very much.
I work with the sales teams across both of our offices, and I've only got a couple of minutes to speak to you today, but I am here, I hope, simply to deliver just some good news about your property investments. And that good news is that moving forward for the next couple of years, there should be a very strong expectation of capital growth. Knight Frank and Saddles very recently both revised upwards their estimate for UK price increases to 3.5% from 2.5% this year due to the improving interest rate landscape. Their forecasts have also risen slightly over the following 3 years, taking the cumulative 5-year total to nearly 23%. Knight Frank's rental forecasts are largely unchanged, but the company has revised up its expectations for the South East marginally due to the ongoing supply squeeze, and the expected introduction of what we're really here to talk about today, the Renters' Rights Bill, later in the year is one factor driving supply lower and rents higher. So the consensus forecast is for growth. The Bank of England, I'm sure you're all very keenly aware, has very recently reduced the base rate from 4.5% to 4.25%, the lowest rate that we've enjoyed in the last 2 years. However, the forecasts from the HM Treasury Consensus and the International Monetary Fund agree that further rate cuts should be forthcoming, with another 3 cuts expected before the end of the year. What does this all mean? If you're looking to increase your portfolio now, you can be assured of strong capital growth in the following 5 years. But if you're set in your decision to sell and downsize your portfolio, then you can still expect a strong return, strong result from a sale in the here and now. So if you're thinking of selling a rental investment, obviously we'd love to help. When you sell your rental investment with Parkers, you get a number of very important benefits. First and foremost, you get the benefit of our heavily integrated and local sales, lettings and property management teams. We work in the same office, we take meetings together, we work in lockstep with each other across departments, and there is a free flow of information. We're not siloed, meaning that we can easily keep things moving forwards, keep things on track. You get the benefit of our exemplary knowledge of the tenancies, changes in legislation and local market conditions. Your Parkers rental will be fully compliant, and with that, it'll create a faster, more secure, hassle-free transaction. Lastly, you will get the benefit of our honest, practical and proven advice on how to achieve the best outcome whilst offloading your property investment. If, however, you like the idea of increasing your portfolio, because the sound of capital growth and increasing rents sounds like a good thing, then you can expect that property you buy through Parkers to have a fully compliant tenancy, meaning less headaches for you and your solicitor. Our local property management, based here in Witney, provides a best-in-class service for you and your tenants. Our strong relationships with our sitting tenants gives you the reassurance that when you're buying with a tenant in situ, that you're buying a package that is worth bringing on board. Our current stock of rental investments with tenants in situ can provide you with income from day one. No void periods to worry about after you pick up the keys. And we pride ourselves on giving honest and practical advice around maximising the return of your new investment. So if you want to have a chat about either selling or purchasing a new property at the end of this, please come and find me. I will be enjoying a gin and tonic. I'll happily share one with you while we talk about your future investment plans. Thank you.
Me again, I'm afraid. And I'm now going to step massively out of my comfort zone and talk a little bit about this. Not because I want to, because this is something we've been asked about recently. But I'll caveat it by saying this is deep accountancy stuff. It is not my thing. And if you really want to know more detail about this, I would strongly recommend you speak to your accountant. And the other thing is, if you ask me a question about this later, you'll be shot and taken, in fact, no, other way around, you'll be taken outside and shot, because, you know, I don't know more than I'm about to tell you. It is accountancy stuff. But this is coming. In fact, this is supposed to come in 2018. Does that sound familiar? Something delayed to do with the property market? Yeah. This relates to making tax digital and having to make quarterly returns to HMRC. And the first people that are coming to scope for this will be those with an income over £50,000, and that will be from April of 2026. Now, that is both any self-assessment income plus your rental income combined. So if you've got any income, so PAYE, you know, normal income tax, you pay on that, that doesn't count. But if you're on self-employed income plus your rental income, and that combined is in excess of £50,000, then this will bring you into scope. But don't worry, because if you're not on that one of the later tranches will probably catch you out. Because as you'll see in 2027, that's reduced to £30,000, and the year after to just £20,000. And as we've heard, the way that rents are rising, that's going to bring just about everyone into scope, even if you've just got a 2-bedroom house by that point, I suspect. The other thing to bear in mind, if you own your property as a limited company, this won't affect you because, of course, that's corporation tax. But the reason this is being brought in, HMRC reckon there's a £39.6 billion black hole in tax receipts. And they reckon that 60% of this is coming from self-assessment for those that are not filling in their returns correctly. And of course, some of those will be landlords. And that is precisely why they're doing this. But this is coming, and if any more detail, speak to your accountant, but best get ready for it. And the best advice that I could find when I was looking into this is to have a separate bank account for your rental income and expenditure. Of course, there's no stop you taking some of that out and putting it in your personal bank account to spend, that's fine, but have a separate bank account so that if we're doing open banking and you need to look into the detail of this, that is best practice. So, a little bit more on the Renters' Rights Bill. It's not all bad news, in fact it's quite good news. Again, don't look at the detail, but that long list there now is what you need if you want to go to court at the moment to get vacant possession. All of that will go under these new bids, bar being able to prove that you've correctly registered the deposit within the prescribed 28 days. So actually some of that will become a little bit easier. Okay, I might be grasping at straws here to find the bits, but genuinely, that's all going to go. But in principle, as you've heard from Katie and Joy, most things are doubling. The notice periods will be doubling in big handfuls for things that you're used to at the moment, and arrears are not doubling, but they are going from 2 months to 3 months. There will be a host of new Section 8 grounds. We've heard about those already, but really the things that you'll be most interested in, I suspect, will be the new grounds 1 and 1A. Ground 1 is if you want to gain vacant possession to allow a member of your family to move in, and they have defined what a family member is, and it is quite broad. And of course, as Katie was talking about, the new grounds 1 alpha, if you want to sell it, great, but the idea is, ideally, don't use that ground, because then there is a 12-month moratorium on being able to remarket property for let. But there are clever ways or different ways that you might wish to engage in to deal with the sale of a property before you take that option. Because I say, once you've employed that option of using that ground, then that 12-month moratorium will stand. And of course, something else that's been mentioned are the landlord database and the private rental sector redress scheme for landlords. Agents have had to be in a redress scheme for a long time. Landlords will now have to do it too. it's just something else that could be charged for. And I'm often asked, well, how come? It's not fair. You know, landlords have to have a database to check we're not rogues. Why isn't there a rogue tenant database?
There is, we've got it.
There is. Yeah, there is, absolutely. And effectively, it's mostly to do with county court judgments. If someone has a county court judgment against them for non-payment of rent, for antisocial behaviour, then that will come up if you do a search on it. And, you know, Andy knows all about that. So they do exist, but it's not necessarily in the format that people are thinking about. Why isn't there a list I can just pull up off the internet? That doesn't and will not exist because of data protection issues. But yeah, there will be a database that you will have to pay to be the privilege of being a member of. And if you don't, the standard £7,000 fine will appear for a first offence. That's just unfortunately the way it is. But the good news is not all this at Cumberfloss. And the key question that everyone asks, okay, so when's all this happening? What's going on? And I created this slide yesterday, and I expected to be able to update it today. I couldn't, because this is exactly where we are in the process at the moment. And this little wiggly bit here, committee stage in the House of Lords, was supposed to finish yesterday. Funnily enough, it didn't. Today they had a bonus day, and based on the message I received at 5:20 today, I think it has now finished, but it was still going on as I left the office. There were 172 proposed amendments to this bill in the House of Lords. Not one of them has made it through. The best information that we have, best guess, because I'll be honest, that's what it is, but if you think about the stages that are still to go, the fact that there will be a parliamentary recess for summer, there'll then be conference season. When you add all these things together and everything else is going on, I suspect October would be the earliest, and it may even push a little bit to the right of that. But it is a live issue, and as soon as we can give you an answer, we will. But that is genuinely the very best answer I can give you, and that's as up to date as of 5:20 this afternoon. So we're pretty up to speed on this. But as I said earlier, not all this is going to hit us at once. In fact, probably very little will hit us early on. That transition, i.e. the law comes in, and as of this date, every tenancy will no longer be an assured short-hold tenancy, it'll be an assured tenancy. That will hit us, and the regulations will hit us, but the private rented sector database and the redress scheme and things like that will follow when the laws are ready. So they'll be written into the law, but they know they're not ready to deliver this yet, and they'll wait for everything to catch up, and they will trickle in as and when those bits are ready, but that will be downstream and will take longer than the enactment of the law. So that's our best guess, October or later, hopefully not before, because there needs to be time for agents to prepare and for landlords to prepare for this significant change. But yeah, the fixed terms will end immediately and everything else will be ready. So I hope that gives you most of what you need. I will say that we will follow up by email after this with some useful information for you, and hopefully within a couple of weeks a recording as well if there's anything you want to go over again. And on the sheets that you've got is a QR code, so you can drop us a WhatsApp message if you're thinking about something this evening or tomorrow and you think, what were they talking about, or what does this mean for me? Just drop us a message. We'll be delighted to hopefully get you the very best answer we can.